There is a strange silence that lives inside many empaths. Not the silence of peace. The silence of someone constantly measuring the emotions of others before speaking their truth. An empath enters a room and immediately begins translating invisible signals. A sigh, a shift in tone, a delayed response, and somewhere deep inside, an ancient alarm whispers, "Don't disappoint them." Carl Jung once wrote that what remains unconscious controls life from beneath the surface. And for the empath, this fear often hides so deeply that it no longer feels like fear at all. It feels like kindness, like loyalty, like being good. But something darker quietly grows under it. The habit of abandoning the self before anyone else has the chance to abandon it first. And maybe that is why so many empaths leave conversations exhausted without understanding why their soul suddenly feels heavy. Because every interaction becomes an invisible performance. A sacred theater where the empath tries to protect everyone from discomfort, while silently bleeding inside. The empath often learned very early that love could disappear without warning. Not always through cruelty, sometimes through coldness, withdrawal, disappointment in someone's eyes. So the empath became emotionally gifted out of survival. They learned how to soften tension before conflict exploded, how to become agreeable, easy to love, easy to keep. But the subconscious never forgets the original wound. And now, even as an adult, the empath may panic when someone changes energy unexpectedly. A short message, a colder tone, a delayed reply. The nervous system immediately searches for guilt. What did I do wrong? That question becomes a prison the empath rarely speaks about aloud. Because everyone sees the caring nature, but almost nobody sees the quiet terror hiding behind it. There is something mystical about how empaths carry responsibility for emotions that were never theirs to hold. An empath can walk into a storm that belongs to someone else, and somehow leave feeling personally guilty for the rain. This is where the shadow begins. Jung believed the shadow forms from the parts of the self rejected in order to receive love and acceptance. And many empaths rejected one dangerous thing, the right to disappoint people. So they became shapeshifters, masters of emotional adaptation. Different voice for different people, different personality for different rooms, different truth depending on who might leave. But the soul becomes fragmented when authenticity is traded for emotional safety. And eventually the empath wakes up one day feeling strangely invisible, even while everyone claims to love them. Because nobody truly knows the person beneath the adjustments. The empath fears becoming the villain in someone else's story. That fear runs deeper than most people realize. Sometimes the empath would rather destroy their own peace than risk being misunderstood. Rather stay silent than appear selfish. Rather overgive than hear the painful sentence, "You changed." But here is the hidden paradox. The empath who constantly avoids disappointing others slowly begins disappointing themselves. And the soul keeps score. Not through punishment, through emptiness, that unexplained fatigue, that emotional numbness, that strange loneliness in crowded places. It is often the soul whispering, "You abandoned me again." Some empaths secretly believe their worth depends on emotional usefulness. If they help enough, heal enough, listen enough, maybe they will finally feel safe. But safety built on constant self-sacrifice is fragile, because people unconsciously grow accustomed to the empath carrying emotional weight. And the moment the empath finally says no, the illusion cracks. This becomes one of the empath's greatest triggers. Not anger, not rejection, disappointment, that subtle look in someone's eyes when the empath stops overextending themselves. And suddenly guilt floods the body like cold water. But guilt is not always proof of wrongdoing. Sometimes it is proof that conditioning is breaking. There are empaths who apologize for things that were never their fault. Apologize for needing space, for feeling overwhelmed, for changing emotionally after being hurt too many times. Somewhere along the way, they learned that harmony was more important than truth. But buried beneath that people-pleasing nature is often enormous suppressed rage. Not violent rage, soul rage. The grief of never feeling fully allowed to exist without managing everyone else's emotions first. Jung warned that whatever is buried alive inside the psyche eventually returns in darker forms. And this is why some empaths suddenly withdraw from everyone without explanation. Why they disappear emotionally. Why they become cold after years of warmth. The soul can only survive self-betrayal for so long before it begins demanding resurrection. The empath often senses emotional shifts before words are spoken. It feels almost supernatural. A room changes temperature emotionally, and the empath feels it instantly. But this gift becomes dangerous when combined with fear, because the empath starts overanalyzing every expression, every silence, every distance. And eventually they stop living in reality. They begin living inside emotional predictions, trying to prevent disappointment before it happens, trying to maintain connection before anyone even asks. This creates invisible anxiety that never fully rests. The empath becomes emotionally hypervigilant, always scanning, always adjusting, always carrying the tension of relationships like sacred glass that could shatter at any moment. There comes a moment in many empath journeys where exhaustion becomes spiritual, not physical tiredness, something deeper, a tiredness of pretending, of shrinking, of emotionally translating themselves into versions others can comfortably accept. And strangely, this pain often becomes the beginning of awakening, because eventually the empath starts asking dangerous questions. What if disappointing people is necessary? What if harmony without authenticity is not love? What if my sensitivity was never meant to become self-erasure? These questions crack open the subconscious like thunder in the dark. And suddenly the empath begins seeing old relationships differently. Not everyone loved the soul. Some only loved the endless emotional accommodation. That realization changes everything. One of the hardest lessons for the empath is understanding that being misunderstood will sometimes happen no matter how pure the intention was. Not every person will see the heart correctly. Not every ending can be softened. Not every truth can avoid causing discomfort. And yet the empath keeps trying to create impossible emotional outcomes where nobody feels pain. But pain is part of human connection. Growth is uncomfortable. Boundaries disappoint people. And the mature empath slowly learns something life-changing. Disappointing others is not the same as harming them. For the first time, the empath begins separating compassion from self-destruction. And the soul finally exhales. Perhaps the empath was never meant to carry the emotional survival of everyone around them. Perhaps sensitivity was not given as punishment, but as a doorway into deeper consciousness. Jung believed individuation begins when a person stops living according to unconscious expectations and begins becoming who they truly are. For the empath, this path feels terrifying at first, because authenticity risks rejection. Boundaries risk disappointment. Truth risks loss. But something sacred waits on the other side of that fear. A life no longer built on emotional performance. Relationships where love does not require self-abandonment. Peace that does not depend on keeping everyone happy. And maybe the greatest awakening for the empath is realizing this. The people truly meant for your soul will survive your honesty. There are moments when the empath feels guilty simply for changing, as if healing itself is somehow betrayal. The people who once depended on endless understanding begin feeling confused when the empath becomes quieter, slower to rescue, harder to emotionally access. And the empath notices it immediately, that subtle distance, that invisible disappointment. The old fear awakens again. If I stop carrying everyone, will anyone still love me? This is why growth feels terrifying for many empaths, because transformation threatens relationships built on emotional self-sacrifice. And sometimes the empath remains emotionally trapped, not because they are weak, but because their nervous system learned to associate authenticity with abandonment. The empath often confuses being needed with being valued. It happens so quietly that years pass before the realization arrives. People call the empath special, safe, different, but deep inside, the empath wonders, would they still stay if I stopped giving so much? This question haunts the subconscious, because many empaths were praised more for what they provided emotionally than for who they truly were. so they became caretakers of wounded souls, emotional shelters for lost people, silent healers who forgot they were bleeding too. And somewhere along the way, exhaustion became normal. There is an ancient loneliness many empaths carry that almost nobody sees. A loneliness created by constantly being emotionally available while secretly feeling unseen themselves. The empath listens deeply to everyone's pain, yet rarely reveals the full depth of their own. Why? Because disappointing people does not only mean saying no. Sometimes it means showing darkness, neediness, anger, confusion. And many empaths fear that if others ever witnessed the chaos hidden beneath the calm exterior, love would vanish instantly. So the empath becomes emotionally beautiful on the outside while quietly drowning underneath. Jung believed that what is rejected within becomes projected onto the world. And many empaths reject their own human imperfection. They try to become emotionally pure, gentle all the time, understanding all the time, forgiving all the time. But no human soul was designed to live without shadows. Eventually, the buried resentment begins leaking through tiny cracks. A colder tone, sudden withdrawal, emotional numbness, unexpected anger that even the empath does not fully understand. This is not failure. It is the shadow demanding acknowledgement after years of silence. Some empaths fear conflict more than pain itself, because conflict activates old emotional memories stored deep in the nervous system. Raised voices, disappointment, emotional withdrawal. The body remembers, so the empath becomes skilled at preventing emotional storms before they begin. Reading people, calming situations, swallowing truth. But there is a hidden cost to constantly choosing peace over authenticity. The soul slowly forgets its own voice, and one day the empath may wake up unable to recognize who they became beneath all the emotional adaptation. The empath often attracts people who unconsciously crave emotional healing, not because the empath seeks this role, but because wounded people recognize warmth instantly. And at first it feels meaningful, sacred even. The empath feels chosen, needed, important. But many of these connections quietly become one-sided emotional contracts. The empath pours endlessly into the relationship while secretly hoping someone will finally notice their own silent suffering. Yet the empath rarely asks directly for care, because deep down, they fear becoming too much. So they continue giving what they desperately wish someone would give them. There is something heartbreaking about how many empaths apologize for their boundaries. "I'm sorry, I just need space. I'm sorry, I can't do this today. I'm sorry for feeling overwhelmed," as if existing naturally requires forgiveness. But the subconscious conditioning runs deep. Some empaths learned that love became unstable whenever they expressed needs. So now every boundary feels dangerous. Every act of self-protection feels selfish. And still, the soul keeps pushing toward freedom, quietly, persistently, like a trapped bird remembering the existence of the sky. The empath's greatest fear is often not rejection itself. It is becoming emotionally responsible for someone else's pain. So even when relationships become toxic, even when exhaustion becomes unbearable, the empath hesitates to leave, because they can already feel the disappointment, the sadness, the blame, and their nervous system interprets another person's suffering as personal failure. This is why some empaths remain in draining relationships far longer than they should. Not because they cannot see the truth, but because they feel everyone's emotions so intensely that separation feels like emotional violence. There comes a sacred moment when the empath begins realizing something life-altering. Not everyone who becomes disappointed is being harmed. Some people are simply reacting to the loss of access they once had. That realization changes the empath forever, because suddenly guilt no longer automatically means wrongdoing. Sometimes guilt is only the echo of old conditioning trying to pull the empath back into self-abandonment. And once the empath understands this, a new kind of inner power begins awakening. Not loud power, not cruel power, quiet self-respect. The healed empath does not become cold. That is the great misunderstanding. They still love deeply, still feel intensely, still sense the emotions hidden behind words. But now there is discernment where self-sacrifice once lived. Now the empath understands that protecting inner peace is not selfishness, that honesty is not cruelty, that disappointing others sometimes becomes necessary for spiritual survival. And perhaps this is the final transformation. The empath stops asking, "How do I keep everyone comfortable?" and begins asking, "How do I stop abandoning my soul just to be accepted?" There is a quiet grief that appears when the empath finally begins waking up. Not grief for others, grief for the self they abandoned for years, the conversations where they swallowed truth, the relationships where they overextended until exhaustion became identity, the moments they sensed disrespect but stayed gentle to avoid disappointing someone. And suddenly the empath realizes something painful. They spent so much time trying not to hurt others, while allowing their own soul to slowly disappear unnoticed. This realization arrives like cold rain at midnight, heavy, sacred, impossible to ignore once seen. The empath eventually discovers that emotional peace cannot be earned through endless accommodation, because there will always be someone who wants more access, more energy, more understanding, more sacrifice. And if the empath builds identity around keeping everyone emotionally satisfied, life becomes an endless performance with no true resting place. This is why many empaths feel strangely exhausted even during quiet moments. Their body never fully leaves survival mode. Part of them is always preparing for emotional disappointment, always monitoring reactions, always trying to stay lovable. But love built upon self-erasure is not love. It is fear wearing the mask of devotion. Carl Jung believed that becoming whole requires facing the shadow honestly. And perhaps the empath's deepest shadow is this: the hidden desire to be emotionally indispensable, to be the one nobody leaves, the one everyone needs, the one who heals every wound. But healing begins when the empath accepts a difficult truth. You were never meant to save everyone from discomfort. You were never meant to carry every emotional burden. You were never meant to abandon yourself to prove your goodness. Some people will misunderstand your boundaries. Some will call your distance selfish. Some will miss the version of you that never said no. Let them, because the soul cannot evolve while chained to constant emotional permission. And slowly, something mystical begins happening inside the empath. The fear softens, not completely, but enough. Enough to speak honestly without rehearsing every possible reaction. Enough to choose rest without drowning in guilt. Enough to let others experience disappointment without immediately assuming personal failure. This is where emotional freedom begins. Not in becoming less sensitive, but in finally understanding that sensitivity was never meant to become self-punishment. The empath stops shrinking to fit inside other people's comfort zones. And for the first time in a long time, their spirit can finally breathe without fear. In the end, the empath was never too emotional, never too deep, never too caring. The real wound was believing love had to be earned through constant self-sacrifice. But true connection does not require the death of the self. Real love survives honesty. Real love survives boundaries. Real love survives disappointment. And maybe that is the final lesson hidden beneath all of this. The empath's soul was never asking to become harder, only freer. Freer to exist without performing. Freer to love without losing themselves. Freer to walk away from relationships that demand emotional self-betrayal as proof of loyalty. And once the empath understands this, they no longer fear disappointing people quite the same way, because they finally realize the greatest disappointment was never disappointing others. It was abandoning themselves. If these words felt strangely familiar, maybe your soul was meant to hear them at this moment. Share in the comments which part touched you the deepest. And if you're walking this empath journey too, subscribe and stay close. There are truths here your spirit may have been searching for all along. Thank you for watching.